And because I can imagine while you're there, you're totally distracted by everything and maybe impressed by everything that's there.
Yeah, you search, the first impression of such a place is that you search for recognition. You search for something, you know, we also found a drum set, so the fourth song of the album, Told to Be Fine, is actually based around a drum set we found, and we put it in the gym and we started hitting the drum. So when you hear that song, you can hear this reverb that is actually what's this? This is a nice picture book to do interview with, but actually this is like the gym. So we put the drums in this gym, and there was a big reverb in there. So when you hear the song, you can hear the reverb of the drums in this gym. It was all in a place called the Culture Palace, where they had the concert hall, the rehearsal space, and the gym, and in that way, I think what you search for is kind of like first of all sounds or instruments that you kind of recognize, and then you start kind of going around and you hit different kind of things, and the next state, at least for us, was to kind of try and make when you've hit different kind of sounds, you figure out in a way that there's certain kind of nature to sound. They won't surprise you that much after a while. Of course, it's interesting to hit different things, but there's also some kind of it starts repeating itself somehow. What then happens is that we started kind of coming up with ideas of structures and kind of, you can say, games or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that could be, for instance, there's this one song, and it's also in a teaser we put out. Maybe you can link to it or something like that. There's a sort of like these paths where they were like you can say walking, where they were walking on. They had the tubes under it, and there was in the winter when the snow is high, the pipes of the hot water kind of keeps these paths clear. And so I did a run with a click in my ear, like a tempo, and I tried to kind of keep up with the click. And I had a microphone in my hand, and I've started running. And things like this was kind of like games to kind of, you can say, where the sound is not so important anymore. It's more about sort of a happening. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the next state. We also did some recordings where we went into a complete block of building where all the women of the city used to live. It's more like a, I don't know if you call it a collegium or like something where students live. There's a one room per person or something like that. And in each room there's a poster, or there's actually cigarette packets or liquor labels or different kind of things on the wall that kind of indicates that there's been a certain person with certain interest, maybe some photos and a Beatles poster or something like that. And then we decided that there was like 120 rooms or something like that. We decided, okay, let's walk into the next room and you decide what kind of sound we will record in there. We were all kind of hooked up to this one device and this one microphone. So we had like 3 people on one microphone, and then we just went in there, recorded the sound, went out again, went into the next room, and the next person would choose the sound. And in that way it becomes, you can say, your own kind of, you start playing around with it in a way. And then the sound is very important, of course, but it's also part of a happening in a way.
Because I can imagine once you go home, you're back home, you're out of that world, that special place. Yeah, you have probably, you can say, but a lot of sounds that all have to find their way somehow, or not, onto the record. How was it to maybe just go through that pile again, but then with different ears, because then you were probably at home, to make sense out of all that you were recording maybe with your ears?
The way we did it, at least, we had to establish a filter, because we had around 1,000 recordings when we came home, and we didn't have time to go through all of the recordings. But the way we did it was that Mads, who's kind of the most technical, skilled guy in our band, was and also the guy that does all of our electronics and so on. He would go through the archives with his memory. So he would go, okay, I remember there was this tank, the Miss Piggy sound that I showed you, and I remember that was a nice sound. Let's go and find that in the archive. And then he would make a little loop or a little sequence of that, and he would send it to Rasmus and and I would start working on songs. And so he would kind of use his memory of the place and memory of the different sights and sounds as sort of like a filtering process, because going through the whole thing and archiving, it would just be not only really time consuming, but probably also unnecessary in many ways. Because once we got back from Piramida, this whole idea of memorizing and the idea of thinking back, the idea of your brain kind of starting, messing up the whole reality and this kind of thing. That one started somehow. So that was a good way to do it. To start using your brain. What do you remember in a way? That's good in any. I think many musicians would recognize that kind of way of making music. You sit at your guitar and you play a melody. If you remember it 2 weeks later, then it's a good melody. So.